Brighton.
Hang on, I bigged them up at the beginning of the season. I was excited about Brighton at the beginning of the season.
Right, fine. But were you expecting that they were going to win this game?
Win it? No.
No,
I thought
absolutely
if they could get a draw after last weekend's performance, that would be amazing. I got really lucky this weekend because I did Man City Brighton and I did Leicester Arsenal.
What
the
a
two,
touch.
the two big games. Love it. That was... So I find sometimes as a photographer, if I'm watching a match and I'm like working for Gravity as well, I'm doing like multiple things, and sometimes you kind of experience the game slightly differently than if you're sitting up in a stand just watching the game. And I'm sitting there thinking, God, Man City are all over this, like so much possession, hit the crossbar in the first 20 seconds. I was like, they're going to get a goal. Any minute now there's going to be a goal because they're dominating this game. And actually on reflection, when the game finished, I thought about the fact that a lot of their shots, they had created 35 chances, Chloe, and about 13 of them on target. So many of the chances that they created were straight down the throat of Sophie Bagley. And they were being forced into taking long distance or kind of shots from outside the box. There weren't that many. I think it was one really good diving save to the right from Sophie Bagley. And don't get me wrong, she did make a lot of saves. But in terms of what they were creating, Brighton did a very good job of stopping them from getting a lot of really clear-cut chances on goal. And I think that is down to how they set up. They knew they weren't going to have a lot of the ball. That's something that Mel Phillips said after the match. They knew they were going to be out of possession a lot of the time. It was about their movement, it was about staying focused and about being strong defensively. And they were. And, you know, there were frustrating times in midfield where they would lose possession and there would be their own kind of undoing a lot of the time where they would just give the ball back to Man City in their own half. But actually, I think a lot of credit has to go to them with how they managed the game defensively.
I have to slightly disagree, I think.
I love when you do.
It's there were 35. The fact that 35 chances were created suggests to me that Brighton allowed those chances to happen. Obviously, 13 shots on goal, you're expecting that Man City are going to be more clinical. And I think I was disappointed with, Hemp, Kelly, Bunny Shaw's header sort of skimming the crossbar. All of these chances, like you said, were directly down the throat of Bagley. I think had they were getting into positions that were like right on the 6-yard box. I mean, they should have been doing better with those. And I think it was Man City not firing on all cylinders and capitalising on being more accurate that actually was Brighton's saviour. It was just one of those games where the ball was just allergic to the back of Brighton's net. It was just that. I don't think Bagley had an outstanding game. She's been incredible this season, but I don't think there was a lot technically for her to do, bar one or two sort of more difficult.
Bar that one down to the right,
yeah. Absolutely. But I think it was more on the fact that City couldn't convert, that Brighton were brilliant. I think Brighton were good. I just mean like focus-wise, right? You would expect at some point that something would slip, and I think they did well to like be throwing their bodies on the line, and you'd almost understand if they were like, oh my God, this barrage is too much, and kind of fall apart. And I think they managed not to do that. I think you're right, it was an element of, I think they did well defensively, but equally City were flat. Absolutely. And I think it's quite nice, I think, to see Brighton in a position now, 8th in the table, far away from the relegation zone. I think they're not on that relegation roundabout that they kind of were. And I know I appreciate it's still very early doors, but they don't seem to have the same heat that they did at the start of the season. I mean, we were constantly talking about Brighton at the pack. When we were doing that horse analogy last season, how many times we were like, Brighton's behind. Are Brighton going to fall at the next hurdle? Like, we weren't expecting that Brighton would come into a game like Man City and have any chance of walking away with that point. And I'm glad they did. It just makes it a spicier league. But at the same time, what an absolute blow for City to have two former players of theirs be the one that put the very small, tiny, very early nail in WSL title hopes. It was painful, and I think City, it was a complete lapse in judgment from City. I mean, the ball in from Bremer, obviously Lee converted the back post. Keaton had absolutely no chance, nothing that you could say about that, but it was a complete lapse and it cost them. Brighton had, I think, 6 chances, 6 opportunities and 3 shots on target, and one of those went in. So when you look at how accurate or how clinical, how efficient Brighton were, they won it at the end of the day, yeah.
And it's hard because that's 2 losses on the bounce. Like, Man City have now lost that really great home record that they had, and another really interesting point, obviously Brighton have never beaten Man City before, first of all. Secondly, they failed to keep a clean sheet for 15 away matches. And it was the first time they'd kept a clean sheet in that length of time. to Man City, which is pretty incredible. But yeah, that's going to be a real blow. And I think we've touched on this before. We always talk about the big games where the top four would play each other. But actually, like, one banana skin along the way could potentially enroute, you know, your road to victory or your road to the title. So, you know, they've now got to come off the back of 2 defeats and play Manchester United at Old Trafford next weekend. So it's tough. Like, they have to go again. They have to pick themselves up. We were looking at them as a team that were going to, you know, we expected to be consistent given they hadn't brought in a whole load of names. You know, so it is, it's going to be interesting to see how this derby goes next week.
Well, I think this is the thing now. Are Brighton positioning themselves as the new disruptors to the WSL? I mean, you've got 2 games. If you'd have said to Brighton, oh, you're going to take away 4 points out of a game with Manchester United and a game with Man City, they would have said, not on your not in any sphere of our imagination is that going to happen realistically. Like, when you're doing your kind of points about who you're going to pick up points for, where you're going to lose points at the start of the season, those would have been 2 games that probably would have been a write-off. And now they're going into their next game with who's their next game?
Against Arsenal.
Yeah, another top 4 side. And Arsenal should be thinking, Christ, like, we had a pretty bad first half. If we're playing that first half like that against Brighton, it might not be the same incredible comeback that we see for the second week in a row. So, yeah, Aston Villa, who we thought were going to be the disruptors, haven't disrupted shit.
I think what's interesting is maybe there's not like one consistent disruptor, but there's multiple disruptors along the way. This is the thing. You've got Liverpool taking points off Arsenal. You know, you've got teams here and there, and it's just showing that no game is a walk in the park, right? Like, they might be focusing, obviously, a lot. We look at the top 4 clashes and stuff, but actually, along the way, you could slip up, you could lose easily to a team that you don't expect to lose from, and suddenly, you know, the table is looking entirely different, and Arsenal are no longer 6th or 7th, now they're 2nd. Like, what is going on?
This is wild. So Brighton now sit in 8th. Does this kind of like feel like a bit of a transitional moment that you go from being a relegation Robin to being a middle of the table Melvin? Do you know what I mean? Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I know.
Did you prepare that?
I actually didn't. That's actually just come to me. But you think about all the kind of the players they're bringing in. They brought in Mel Phillips, who obviously had quite a lot of success at London City Lionesses, who were always in the top rankings of the Championship for, I think it was about 4 or so years. And then you look at the fact that last month Brighton got permission for England's first purpose-built women's football ground. This is ambition. I mean, Melissa Phillips was saying after the game, the club's not been shy about sharing ambition towards the top 4, and that's not anything with a definitive timescale. They want to do it, obviously, you know, right and in the right way. But she said that's just something we need to be moving towards every single day with the actions we take on and off the pitch. So, you know, small steps. You're not in the bottom 2 anymore. You are the sort of where Spurs were kind of sitting, the Spurs, West Ham, Everton kind of group, in and around there. That's the difference now.
And I don't want to get too carried away, because they need to be beating the teams they expect to beat, and that's where the challenges come, because we know teams step it up when they're an underdog, right? And it's seeing them maintain that kind of level of performance in a game where they expect to get points out of it. So it'll be interesting to see how, because I do think Brighton have improved as the season has gone on. Even against Chelsea, I thought they played well in the second half. So it's how they carry that on into each game that will be really important. And we've talked before about ambitious teams and where they're maybe putting their funding, right? And we've said, you know, you've got teams that maybe need to be putting more into what players they're bringing in if they really want to compete. Or you've got clubs who are saying, well, we're going to put the money into a stadium or the training facilities or whatever it might be. So I do think it's a slower process, and that's fine. And it's so long as the club are maintaining that expectation, they're not kind of going above and beyond and saying, well, we've put a load of money into this training facility, so now you should be top 4. Like, it does take time. And it's an interesting approach, and it'll be interesting to see how they get on, because it's expensive to build a purpose-built stadium. You know, a lot of other clubs are saying, right, our ambition is to be in the main stadia. That's where our goal is. You look at Arsenal, who say, that's where our goal is. We want to get to a point where they're playing there every week, which part of me thinks makes more sense because the stadium is already there. But, you know, if that's where you want to be putting your money, that's another route, I suppose. And we've always talked about not just kind of going down the same route all the time in women's football, but trying new things.
Well, they always seem a sort of side that has come from having a genuine interest in the women's side. I mean, when you look at, Paul Barber, the CEO, he's one of the directors on the board of Women in Football. He's always been sort of, very concerned with the women's team in what it seems to be quite a genuine level. And then even before that, you had Polly Bancroft there, who obviously did an amazing job. She was one of the first people to say, we're not going to have white shorts anymore, we're going to change that set. So there were things that they were doing before it sort of became a trend to sort of start some of these things. So they do seem like a side that has done things slowly, but in the right way.
Yeah, and it's not a side where they're like, why aren't we making a profit? It's not worth investing in, right? They appreciate that it's going to take time to start turning a profit. And you need that in a club. If you're genuinely invested in women's football, you have to appreciate that it takes time. Mm-hmm. And you do get that vibe from Brighton.